Good evening, everybody. This is the September 5th, 2024 regular meeting of the Somerville Planning Board. I am Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the planning board. With me tonight is the vice chair, Amelia Aboff, our clerk, Jahan Habib, and members Michael McNeely, Luke Schuster, and Debbie Howard Easton. We have a fairly full agenda this evening. But initially, pursuant to the Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Planning Board is conducted via remote participation. The video recording of these proceedings will be available on the city's website or by emailing planning@somervillema.gov. So we will have a reasonably full agenda this evening. Hopefully, we can move through some of these items with some reasonable expediency, and we'll see what happens. First off, though, it has come to my sad attention. Debbie, do you have an announcement that you must make?
I do.
To my chagrin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm stepping down from the planning board, but I did want to express that it's been a good experience, and I've been very impressed with how thoughtful everyone on the board has been, and prepared and deliberate. And I'm encouraged going forward that you'll still be sitting on the board, and encourage you to continue as you have been, as projects come forward, thinking about development impacts on both, the future residents and businesses that we're developing for, and also, the folks and businesses that have been here for a long time and looking to stay. So.
Thank you for your number of years with us, and I certainly, for one, will miss you. But good luck in moving forward. The items on our agenda tonight, we have a continuance that has been requested by 71 to 72 Union Square, who was asked for a continuance to the September 19th meeting. The chair moves to continue that agenda item to the meeting on the 19th, seconded by Amelia. Sarah, if we could please have a roll call.
Absolutely. Roll call vote on continuing 71 to 72 Union Square to September 19th. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
And Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
We also have meeting minutes. So I'm taking items out of order. We have meeting minutes for August 1st, which I will say, with having staff that's able to give us our meeting minutes within 12 months is a pretty great feat. So I just want to thank everyone who's gone into preparing these minutes and going through our recordings to get us stuff as quickly as they have been as of late. So does anybody have any comments or questions or suggested edits to the August 1st draft meeting notes? Yes, Amelia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have one suggested edit. On the second page, in the section dealing with 71 to 72 Union Square, in the 6th paragraph, there's a note: it was a surprise that the planning board put a semi-in perpetuity condition on these shops regarding operating by appointment only. I'm not sure whether that's meant to convey that it was a surprise to the applicant or a surprise to the licensing commission, and I don't feel like we took any actions that were a surprise. So I would suggest maybe reframing that to recognize that the party had not realized, or something that is a little bit more clear on that. Thank you.
I fully agree with that. That's been a standard condition of the planning board as it relates to that particular condition for applicants managing that type of business. So I'd like the record to reflect the surprise was not due to any surprise by members of the planning board, but perhaps was by different parties not affiliated with the planning board. So I agree with you there. Anybody else have any comments, questions, or suggested edits of the August 1st minutes? Okay. Seeing none, the chair moves to adopt the draft meeting minutes as the final minutes of the planning board, seconded by Amelia. Sarah, can I please have a call of the roll?
Mr. Chair, can we add as amended to
As
that
amended.
motion?
As amended.
Thank you. Roll call vote, Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aba,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Luke Schuster,
Aye.
and Debbie Howard Easton.
Hi.
Motion passes.
Fantastic. We have minutes. I just lost my sheet. Other items on our agenda tonight, two cases, which are 290 Revolution Drive, which has that already been opened and read, Jahan? Do you recall? It has.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And 393 Highland Avenue. Have you read that in yet? I was to make a declaration. I was absent for the last two meetings for various reasons. I have reviewed the audio of both of those. I've signed an affidavit and sent it to the clerk's office. I just don't recall if this particular agenda item was read into the record yet.
Mr. Chair, I do not recall, so I'm happy to read it into the record.
Let's read
Just in case.
393 Highland Avenue in.
Yes, Mr. Chair. 393 Highland Avenue, ZP 24-000058, continued from the August 15th, 2024 meeting. 393 Highland Avenue LLC seeks a special permit to establish a fitness service use on the first floor facing a pedestrian street in the commercial core 4 CC4 zoning district.
Thank you. And then after we hear those cases, we will have two items, well, I guess technically three items of other business, two of which are 14 registered voters requesting a zone amendment to it's the Summernova, the two issues that we had a joint hearing on a number of weeks ago, to add section 8.4.119, and 15 registered voters requesting the zoning map amendment to include 8 Park Street, 10 Park Street, 504 Somerville Ave, 7 to 9 Percy Way, 15 to 27 Percy Way, 29 Percy Way, 26 to 32 Park Street, 8 to 14 Tyler Street, 440 Park Street, 15 Dane Street, 7 to 9 Tyler Street, 30 Dane Street, 24 to 28 Dane Street, 460 Somerville Avenue, 444 Somerville Avenue, 440 Somerville Avenue, and 502 Somerville Avenue in the Summernova Innovation sub area. Those two items are proposed zoning amendments for which we held a joint hearing with the Land Use Committee a number of weeks ago, and on which the planning board is expected to produce a recommendation to the Land Use Committee on those two agenda items. And the last item on the agenda will be the proposed brick bottom plan. So what I'd like to do is take the items slightly out of order in the discretion of the chair. And I would like to take 393 Highland Avenue first. So if we could please have the applicant and the team for 393 Highland Ave first be unmuted, recognized, and have their screens shared for the good of the board and the public. I would appreciate that.
All right, Mr. Chair, I see Adam Dash raising his hand. I have promoted him to a panelist, so he should be able to speak and share his screen.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Attorney Adam Dash, 48 Grove Street in Somerville. I am working on the screen right now. Just give me a moment. There we go. Good evening.
Hello.
So I represent the applicant, 393 Highland Avenue LLC, which is the property owner of the, with us is Gorka Bravo and Lorenzi Bravo, who are also from 393 Highland Ave LLC. Peter Quinn from Peter Quinn Architects, who's the architect on the project for the applicant. Mark Harrington from HealthWorks Fitness is here. And Vince Pan and Brooke Helgerson, who are from Analog Studios, who are the architects for HealthWorks, are here. If we could have them all promoted, that would be great, because I can probably handle most of this because it's a use matter, but if you have detailed questions, it would be nice to have the team there, particularly the HealthWorks folks.
Will do. I will need those names again. Slowly, I see.
Yeah.
You said
If you could also, Sarah, make me able to share my screen so I can show some slides, that'd be great. But yeah, it's Gorka Bravo, Lorenzi Bravo, Peter Quinn, Mark Harrington, Vince Pan, and Brooke Helgerson. Maybe if all of you could raise your hands so Sarah can see you at the top of the list, that might make things easier. There's Mark. Once my screen sharing is enabled, I can then show you what we're doing here. Just to let you know, the property we're talking about at 393 Highland Avenue is the long vacant former Walgreens / Rite Aid / Osco pharmacy, depending on how far back you go. Oh, good. I'm sharing my screen, and it's loading. You should see that now. Excellent. All right, so as I said, you're probably all familiar with this if you've been to Davis Square. This is the property. So HealthWorks Fitness would like to open a gym under its Republic Fitness brand at this location. That is why we're here. As you can see here, the property abuts, this is the property here, the red one. As you can see on Highland Avenue, this is a pedestrian street, which this property abuts, which requires a special permit for fitness use on the first floor. Being a one-story building, it is all the first floor. Likewise, a special permit's required for over 10,000 leasable square feet for fitness use services. So the arguments for both of these are the same, really, because it's all about the use, not so much the building. You can see here, this is the existing survey of the property. As you can see, this is the building right here. It abuts Highland Avenue, the pedestrian street in the front. It abuts the municipal parking lot here on the left. It abuts the MBTA bike path / parking lot here in the rear. To the right, you've got the dead end of Ellington Road, which ends at the building, and then you have a couple of structures here. And as you can see, the building basically covers the entire lot. So you may see if you go by there now that some exterior work is being done in the building, but that's not part of this. That work was previously permitted under a site plan approval that was then revised in 2022. There's a building permit, and that's all going on. That's exterior work only, which involves opening up some of the old windows and repointing brick and that sort of thing. So that's what's going on right now. What we're here to talk about today is the use special permit matters. The building is not changing in footprint. It's not changing in height. And as the building takes up essentially the whole lot, there will be no motor vehicle parking, and none is required because the property is in the 1/4 mile transit area. In fact, the property, the building is right by the Davis Square Red Line station, which is right over here. It abuts the bike path behind it. It's adjacent to a bus stop, which is right here on Grove Street. And it is next to the metered parking lot. So you've basically got almost every mode of transportation covered at this point. The property will have 9 short-term bike parking spaces. I'll show you a close-up in a second, but they're here in red along the Highland Avenue side of the building. They are on city-owned property and will need a permit from the city council should the special permits be approved. And I can show you a close-up of that. And you can see here the red. These are the short-term bicycle parking spaces, which do not exist today and will be compliant. This is the interior floor plan. To the right is Highland Avenue. To the left is a municipal parking lot with the bike path here to the, to the left is the bicycle parking lot. To the bottom is the, goodness gracious, To the left is the bike path. To the bottom is the municipal parking lot. To the right, this is Highland Avenue. You go in the front door, you'll see here, these are the two long-term bike parking spaces we're required to have conveniently by the front door. So as such, the property will comply with the bicycle parking requirement. And as I said, there is no car parking. So even though no ACE space is required, the Arts and Creative Enterprises, the applicant's proposing to add a mural. And this is the left facade, which faces the municipal parking lot. It's about 1,000 square feet, as you can see here. You can see here, these are the windows that have just been reopened as part of the ongoing project right now for the exterior and building envelope. But this then, you may recall that years ago, there was once a mural here that fell into disrepair and was removed. So the idea is to put one back. So the applicant meets the requirements for the special permits, for both special permits actually under 9.2.6.K.2 and 9.1.7.C.1, because it provides a fitness services use in the CC4 district, which is a permitted use in compliance with the plans and standards of Somerville and will activate the pedestrian street. It meets the intent of the CC4 zoning district and will fill a long vacant space. As you know, the CC districts are to create and maintain and enhance areas appropriate for moderately scaled single and multi-use commercial buildings, neighborhood, community, and region serving uses, and a wide variety of employment opportunities, and to provide quality ground story commercial space and permit small and medium scale neighborhood and community and region serving commercial uses, which is exactly what we're doing here. And it also maintains a diverse blend of commercial uses in the neighborhood. There's only one gym, and as you've seen from the about 34 or so emails of support that you probably have received, there's a need for more gym space in Davis Square. And it provides, so this fitness use is going to be slightly different from a lot of the fitness uses. It'll have a friendly, ample staff, high quality equipment and finishes, feature a restore spa with a whirlpool, cold plunge, steam room, and sauna. It'll have a recovery room with massage chairs, Theragun equipment and stretching, and have a large high quality group fitness program. We had a neighborhood meeting on June 12th, which showed a lot of support for the project. I would note that this will serve a large number of workers, residents, and commuters who are in or passing through Davis Square, being that we're right by the T station and the bus line and the municipal parking lot. There is no concentration of gyms nearby, being that there's only one other one in Davis Square. And by comparison, Porter Square has 3 gyms. So there are not many commercial buildings in the neighborhood which could accommodate HealthWorks and their business model while being adjacent to the Red Line bike path bus stop and a municipal parking lot. This is the perfect use for the building, which has been vacant, as you know, for a number of years since Walgreens closed. The owner has been unable to find a tenant despite strong efforts to do so in this building. And now we have the happy confluence of the perfect tenant for the perfect space, which fills a need for the neighborhood. So it's sort of a win-win-win. I would note the application was filed under, originally filed under the special permit for the use facing the pedestrian street district, that the applicant then filed for the second special permit for having a use over 10,000 square feet for fitness use. And I would say for that, the use is compatible with Davis Square. Clearly, there's another gym there. The local thoroughfare network provides the needed capacity and access, and is actually, as I said, multimodal and perfect for this use here. The application is currently complete. We would love it if you could dispose of both special permits tonight. I understand that that staff might say that the notice for the meeting explicitly stated one and not the other. I would note that the notice for the meeting stated just the fact that this is a fitness use facing a pedestrian street and that we're seeking special permit. I don't know that one couldn't do both tonight, but certainly I leave it up to the board as to their pleasure. Just would rather try to be cognizant of your time is all. So as such, applicant requests that you grant the use special permits for the fitness services use at the 393 Highland Avenue. And we're all here to answer any questions anybody has specifically about the use itself.
Adam, thanks very much for the presentation, and thank you for addressing the notice issue about the 2 separate special permits that would be obligated under this application. Could I please ask Sarah, who the relevant staff person is, what the staff's opinion is related to the notice issue? Because if we need to, kick this for 2 weeks to, make sure that we are crossing the appropriate, T's and dotting the appropriate I's, that's what we're gonna have to do. But I'd love Madison, who I just saw unmuted and showed herself, to be able to weigh in.
Yeah, so I am Madison Anthony. I'm the case planner for this, so I would be the relevant staff person, I guess. And regarding the notice issue, it was only noticed for the use special permit for a fitness center facing a pedestrian street. So we are not able, so because it was not legally noticed for the additional special permit, the planning department believes that the board is not able to make a deliberation regarding the second special permit tonight.
Okay. Madison, can I ask you a question? When is the appropriate time for that notice to be, when's the latest time that you can make that notice such that we might be able to take this up at the next possible, soonest possible meeting?
It has to be noticed for 2 consecutive weeks before the planning board hearing.
So if it was noticed, for example, tomorrow, which I don't know if possible. So we have a meeting on the 19th. And then the meeting thereafter is sometime in October.
Yeah, it wouldn't
October
be able
3rd.
to be heard on the 19th. Let's see. It could possibly be heard on the 3rd. I would have to look into the next time we're sending out our legal ads.
All right.
Because we send them out in batches.
That's fine. To the extent that it's possible by staff to expedite the noticing of this particular application, so we're not holding them up unnecessarily, I would appreciate that. But I agree with you that
yeah.
it's not going to come to a final vote this evening, but I am certainly happy because we are talking about a change of use. It's somewhat of a technicality, but it's a real technicality that actually matters. But I would like to take some public testimony about the change of use. And I would also like to have some discussion by and among members of the planning board if we find it's appropriate at this time, unless you'd like to wait until we're coming to the evening where we might take a vote.
Mr. Chair, before we go into that, if I may, Adam Dash again, I would just to put out there, as you know, gyms do most of their bring in most of their clients in January, and when everyone has their New Year's resolutions and all, they really need to get open then. So, and I understand what you're saying about the reposting. Could it be possible to at least vote this special permit tonight, so at least we have some forward momentum on it?
Adam, I feel really terrible about piecemealing this application. I understand the feeling that you need to expedite at least a portion of this, but without having everything in place, you won't be able to open anyway. I don't want to put the board in a position where we're splitting a vote on an application. We've never done that before. I've been on the board since 2008. We've never done 2 separate votes on the same project in my memory. So I don't feel like this is the one to start. So I understand the conundrum, but at the same time, I also want to make sure that this is done properly and consistently. So I appreciate the concern.
I respect. I do just want to note that there is with the new system whereby every bit of relief is going to be applied for as a separate application. You're going to be getting things bifurcated. If someone needs 2 special permits and 2 variances, there'll be 4 applications, and the agendas will show 4 different things. I think that's just going to be the way things go going forward, just so you're aware.
We'll take that up as it comes. This happens to be the first one, and we don't have both properly noticed. So I'm not prepared to move forward with a vote tonight on the special permit that's before us tonight. I want to take this all in one fell swoop so that you can have everything that you need, and your client can have everything they need to sign everything you need and move forward and open as necessary. I'm trying to get this done as quickly as possible. The fact is, we don't have everything that we need tonight. So,
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it. Thank you.
of course. So what I'd like to do right now is, at least for the change of use question, which is the special permit for us tonight, I would like to open this up to public testimony before I open it up to any discussion by the planning board. I, as one member, am going to reserve my comments until we've got everything before us and we're ready to take a vote, but that's just me. So I'd like to open it up to public testimony for anybody that would like to speak in support of the one item of relief that's before us this evening. And if you can,
Mr. Chair, yes, if you could raise your hand, and I apologize, I see Brooke's hand still raised. Apparently, despite my clicking, she was never promoted. I apologize, Brooke.
Brooke is part of the
and-
applicant team. I'm sorry.
Yes, part of the applicant team, so I apologize for that. If there is anybody wishing to speak on this item, please raise your hand.
And actually, before we do this, does Brooke have anything that she'd like to add to what we've said already?
Just, Mr. Chair, Brooks, one of the architects for HealthWorks, is here. Just
Okay.
in case there are questions.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that everybody who needed to speak has had the chance before we open it up. Thank you,
I
Adam.
appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, I am not seeing any hands raised.
Neither am I. I'm going to take one more scroll. Once, twice. I see Amy Bantham. So if Amy Bantham could please be unmuted, and Amy, if you please give your name and address for the record.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, Amy Bantham, 57 Meacham Road, Somerville, 02144. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this. I am a fitness professional, a doctor of public health, and a longtime resident of Davis Square. I am greatly in favor of fitness services in Davis Square for 3 reasons. One is because of the really incontrovertible link between movement and physical and mental health, and see that this would be greatly beneficial for my fellow Somerville residents. 2 is because we need expansion of access to physical activity opportunities where we can move in safe spaces. I know that many areas where Somerville residents currently are physically active along the bike path and in Somerville parks, increasingly residents feel unsafe being physically active there. And so the opportunity to have a safe space to be physically active is very welcomed by the community. And the 3rd reason is because of the nature of who HealthWorks Fitness Group is. As a longtime advocate working for the industry, I have worked with Mark Harrington Jr.'s father, Mark Harrington Sr., on policy and advocacy at the state level. It's a family-run business which treats community as family, and having a fitness service that sees Davis Square as its family would be very welcomed by Somerville residents. So for all those reasons, I'm very much in support.
Amy, thank you very much for your testimony. Is there anybody else that wants to speak in support of this particular permit that's being requested? Please raise your hand. Scrolling through, going once, going twice, seeing none. I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing, and I would like to open it up to anybody that would like to speak in opposition to the application or otherwise express concern to it. once, twice. Seeing none, I'm gonna close that portion of the public hearing and open it up to any discussion by and between members of the planning board, the applicant and staff as anyone deems appropriate. Does anybody on the board have anything they would like to address at this time? Yes, Amelia.
I find this application to be, very appropriate and hopefully non-controversial. The only question I had about it is whether the number of short-term bike spaces being provided is sufficient or should be a topic of possible increase. I feel like given the location on the bike path, that might be a very popular way to access this. I'm not sure what the sort of peak number of customers at any one time might be. So I'm just curious. I assume the 9 number was a zoning decision, not a independent calculation.
Yeah, Adam Dash, yes,
Right.
that's right. That's the zoning requirement. Peter, did you have anything to add to that?
No, it's a calculation based on zoning.
We feel like there's enough multimodal ways to get here with the municipal parking lot, the bike path, the T, and the bus stop right next door that I think everyone feels pretty covered.
I would also add that I think if some additional short-term parking were done, we'd have to do it in cooperation and mutual planning with the city agencies that are involved. There's quite a few different entities that control land right around this site.
Yeah, it did look like you'd maxed out the space that was available sort of around your perimeter. I was
Yeah.
thinking
I think
something.
we just speak by with the none, yeah.
Amelia, was that it?
Yes, thank you.
Does anybody else have on the board have any comments, questions that they'd like to raise with the applicant or staff while we have them now or until we reconvene after the proper noticing period? Okay. I see Debbie, sorry.
Well, I for one am excited about this use, but I actually had more of a curiosity question. Is Republic Fitness, is it an all gender gym as opposed to HealthWorks?
Adam Dash, yes, that's
Okay.
one of the differences, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Which, being my office right next door to this building, I am excited.
Same here.
Mr. Chair,
Anybody else? Yes.
I'm Mark Harrington. I'm one of the owners of HealthWorks Group and kind of very
Sure.
excited to join the Dave Square community. I understand there's certain issues with approving the application tonight. Is there any way that the building department would be able to approve our building permit while we're waiting for these special permits and make them required before we can open, but let us build under risk?
That I cannot speak to and that I cannot control,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Because I think that's our real, I think with the delay, I think that's our real issue is the internal fit out and kind of waiting for the vote to happen and then be recorded.
No, I understand the concern. I just, at least on our end, we're trying to make sure that everything is done in concurrence with the way we've previously done all of these, and make sure that all the permits are voted on at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Luke, yeah.
I want to be careful not to bog us down in the process stuff, but I'd be curious. Here's a question just literally for any of us, other planning board members, planning staff, the applicant team, especially Attorney Dash. Just, is there something obvious we could have done differently to allow us to hear this sooner? Because this does, each case is different, and there's often usually a particular reason why we're punting something to a future meeting, but there's got to be some commonalities too. And I for one am up for feedback on anything we can do different process wise to help avoid this.
It's Adam Dash. I would say, I don't think there's any one thing. I mean, there's been a culmination of some things, including, you know, the last meeting, there wasn't a quorum of the planning board, so we couldn't get heard last time. And then we've had some other issues going forward. It doesn't really matter, I guess, at this point, because we're here where we are. And I do have concerns about this breaking up of applications for each piece of relief being a separate application, that things get separated somewhere during the process going forward. And that this is not necessarily the reason here, but it is certainly something I get concerned about going forward, but I'm willing to give it a shot, and we'll see how this new process goes. But no, I appreciate you taking it up. I mean, I guess the biggest concern is that the ISD wouldn't give us a permit to do the at-risk interior fit-out work while we were going through this long process, because you know it takes a very long time to get in front of you these days. So it would have been nice to be able to do the interior fit-out work to build the gym at risk, meaning if the special permit wasn't granted, it would have to get ripped out, and Healthworks would take that risk. I don't know how that would harm anybody if it's interior fit-out work for a gym. Who cares? But ISD, that was their position, and that's where we are. And I agree with the chair. It's not the planning board who can order ISD to do things, but it would have been nice, because then we wouldn't have a time crunch. But this is what it is.
Adam, if I had control over ISD, the city would be run very, very differently. I can promise you that.
That much I am sure, Mr. Chair. Right back at you too. But the situation is what it is. I mean, it's unfortunate, because we had a prior tenant about a year or so ago, and we did lose them because the process to get to you took too long and the tenant walked. So I don't know what I would say. Overall, it's probably a systematic problem, that I think that this process takes too long, longer than it used to back in the day. I understand why, but I just do what I'm told, you know. I know, sorry, Madison's got her hand up. I don't want to take all the air.
This is Madison Anthony, case planner for this project. I just want to say that there's really nothing the planning board could have done to expedite this process. The planning department and ISD have been extremely accommodating towards the applicant. At the last planning board meeting, the applicant requested to be advertised for that date before a few of the reviews were ready, so they were proceeding at risk anyway, before they got reviews and feedback on their application, which is why they were not aware of the second required special permit at the time. And we put them on an agenda as soon as we got the check from the applicant for the legal fee, with the applicant having the understanding that they were proceeding at risk of them possibly needing additional relief.
No, and I agree totally with Madison. I'm not faulting anybody in the planning staff. They've been very accommodating. Everyone's been very accommodating. The public's been supportive. There's not been any voiced opposition to the project. The council has been supportive. It's just, as you said, Mr. Chair, it's just technicality, and it's just frustrating. But it is what it is.
No, I'll tell you right now. You know, I said I was going to reserve comment, but I will just say, if everything was before me tonight, you know, in the appropriate, appropriate methodology, I would have, voted in support of this application kind of immediately. I'm making sure that I'm protecting the planning board, as it relates to our permit granting authority, and the noticing issues, which of course are always a big concern for the way that we do things. So I appreciate that.
I just want to add that we appreciate the planning board and the planning department's support of this, and just so everyone on the board kind of has perspective here, the process officially started in early May. So just kind of when you're thinking in your mind, kind of where the businesses that are kind of in front of you stand, that's I think we're about average from what I hear, and it's definitely it's kind of the rules make sense, but kind of when you add them all together sequentially, it really does extend the timeline and make it really challenging for a business to start off in Somerville.
That's it. And of course, I'm not going to delve too much into it. There's always a lag between what statutes, ordinances, regulations say and require, and how somebody who's trying to work with those would like them to. So I get all that, and we just are where we are. So I appreciate that, Mark. Thank you. If there is nothing else on this particular application before the board? I see one hand being raised. Mr. Bravo.
Yes. How are you? Good night. Thank you to everybody for the help and the support. So, Madison, I guess that I'm asking this question to you. When will be the sooner that we can be back on the agenda? Because it's really important for us. You know, we have the financing in place. We cannot close for financing. And, you know, and I understand that it needs to be advertised, but if we can be on the next meeting, that will really be helpful. You know, everybody is on board, all councilors, all the ex-aldermen at large. You know, you can see all the support letters, and it is really important for us.
Mr. Bravo, before I ask Madison Anthony to respond, I would just say this is not exactly the purpose of a planning board meeting. I would ask you to work more directly with staff. I'm sure you have.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Her contact information.
Yes.
We'll be closing this particular hearing, or we have closed at least the oral and written testimony for the oral testimony of this portion. We'll leave the written testimony open for another couple of weeks. But this is something that you should work with staff offline on.
Okay.
So, with that in mind, what I'd like to do is move to continue this agenda item, and I'm just going to put you on for the 19th, and if it's not ready by that point, we'll get a request for a continuance. From you, I'm
Mr.
sure.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, Sarah.
I know the advertising date for the meeting on the 19th has already passed.
Okay, so
So
it'll be
that-
October 3rd at the earliest.
It'll be the next meeting after that, unfortunately, but due to the timing of the holiday and the advertising dates.
Then that's where we're at. So what I'd like to do then, based purely on exactly what Sarah just said, I'd like to move to continue this agenda item to the October 3rd meeting. Seconded by Amelia. Sarah, can we please have a roll call vote?
Absolutely. Roll call vote. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Hi.
Jahan Habib, Luke Schuster,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
and Debbie Howard Eastern.
Aye.
What I'd also like to do is keep because we've got a permit that's been heard. We are taking this up again on the 3rd. As is the usual practice of the planning board, I'm going to keep the written comment open until the noon on the Friday prior to that meeting, which is September 27th. So at noon. So any written comment on the application that's already been heard needs to be received as planning at somervillema.gov by noon on the 27th, and we will be able to take up what we need on the 3rd.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Okay. Next item on the agenda is Revolution Drive, 290 Revolution Drive. So if I can have the applicant and team for Revolution Drive up and unmuted and shared and all that relevant stuff, I would appreciate.
On it at the moment.
I see Attorney Galuccio, at least.
Yep, and Attorney Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Sarah. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Hope you had a good summer. Nice to see you all. I am joined by co-counsel Darren Beard. Not sure if Yoreni Sanchez is here, but I would like to recognize her as part of the team. Bill Johnson with Liberty, and he doesn't need to be a panelist at this time, but Danielle Hutchinson is doing the screen sharing. So if we could raise her to panelist, Danielle.
Just found her.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
May-
Amelia.
Take a disclosure, please, that I'm working with attorneys Baird and Sanchez on another matter, which is not affecting my judgment here. Thank you.
Thank you for the disclosure.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, we could also elevate Bill Johnson, Director of Real Estate, also as a panelist. Maybe Sarah.
Absolutely. And Danielle is going to be sharing screen.
Yes, please.
Sorry, my computer, my list is jumping around right now. All right. Hopefully that'll work for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Danielle. Mr. Chair and honorable members of the planning board, I'm going to try to do this succinctly. This journey started back prior to May. The short story is the original owner, as part of their site plan approval, referred to the space along Revolutionary Drive facing the Cambridge, as I think about it, the Cambridge Health Alliance property, as active retail. So that traveled with the special permit and the original site plan approval. Property was sold. This space has been vacant for almost 3 years. The current owner began conversations with Liberty Mutual, who owns Comparion, which is an insurance arm of Liberty, about this space. Liberty and Comparion, same entity, very excited about being an assembly, worked with the landlord on lease, on a leasehold for this space. Liberty finds out that the original site plan approval references the space as retail active. Prior to me being involved, there are some conversations about whether or not Liberty's use qualifies as retail active space. Sarah will remember this. And it just came to a point where it really doesn't satisfy the strict criteria of active retail. So we agreed to file a major amendment, and we did so. And just to reference, this just gives I know the board is very familiar with assembly. The X is the frontage, again, that faces CHA. There is a small park plan for the location across the street, which is a subject referenced in staff memos. I'll start in May. The staff does not recommend supporting the major amendment and expresses concerns about the alignment with the park across the street and sort of how they view the relationship with the park. We also thought that there were maybe some miscommunication around what the Liberty use was. And so we went in, we had a really good staff meeting. Thanks, Sarah, for helping to coordinate, Steve Carey, ISD. So we go in and meet, and I think we did a much better job of expressing how active the space was going to be utilized for a workforce, brokers, clients, members of the public to be able to come in at any time. It's a comprehensive insurance offering, Monday through Friday with Saturday appointments. I don't want to speak for staff, but I think staff felt more comfortable after that meeting that while it's not a retail space, it certainly is a space that's complementary to Assembly Square in terms of supporting retail and activation and live bodies, and obviously recognizing the space has been vacant for a long time. At that meeting, staff asked us to consider a piece of the space to support the park when it opened. And the idea was suggested by staff that there be storage, meeting space to just sort of support park activities. You know, what came to mind during the meeting was, you know, like this movie night at the park, and the city needs to store projectors or whatever. We added, could also be meeting space for local groups, etc. So that suggestion came out of that meeting. And again, I think the meeting was very productive in terms of like what Liberty was going to use the space for. We came out of that meeting and we did provide a memorandum from legal team on behalf of Liberty to say that we would grant this space as supportive use space for purposes of park support or meeting. We were happy with that. Obviously, Mr. Chair, we were continued. There was a quorum issue. So prior to that meeting, a second memo came back from planning staff, which articulates that history, but asks Liberty for a change to the original request as storage meeting space, and suggests that Liberty consider an art studio in the space with access to public bathrooms. Unfortunately, Liberty has Liberty's mission, obviously, and Comparion's is insurance. The space needs to be secure. The mission is, to provide insurance products, and Liberty's just not comfortable overseeing an art space, nor is it comfortable providing public bathrooms. The memo does ask us to sort of respond to whether public bathrooms in and around the vicinity of this space are available. You folks know where the public bathrooms are in Assembly. It's really the T and a couple other locations. So it's a good news story. I think we made a lot of progress with staff, and Stephen was excellent, and Sarah's input, and we thought we were sort of there. And then obviously this additional ask came in that we really can't do. But again, we're really excited to be able to produce office space, which is allowed under the zoning, as you know, that we think is more than just office space. It's very active, publicly trafficked space that will bring a lot of folks to Assembly, and to provide some supportive space to the park. So we're at a point where the process has gone on, for a significant amount of time. And this is an offering that Liberty's really comfortable with and excited about, and Liberty wants to make this a flagship office for Comparion, and they're super excited about being in Assembly. So that's sort of where we are to date, Mr. Chair. And we appreciate the board's patience, and we appreciate the opportunity to be before you tonight. Bill, excuse me, Mr. Chair, Bill is available. I think I've given a good description of what Comparion will be doing, but Bill is available to answer any questions about what the Liberty space would be used for. Sorry to interrupt you.
Sure, no problem at all. I have a number of comments and questions that I have about this particular application that I'm going to reserve until after public testimony. But my screen is a little odd, so I can't see all my colleagues. Does anybody on the board, before I open it up to testimony, and any comments potentially by staff, because this is an application for which we have no recommendation, which we don't usually get. We have one other that's still in the pipeline, that's been in the pipeline for a number of months in a different location, but a no recommendation is not something that's common, and so I take that somewhat seriously. And I don't know if anybody on the board has any comments or questions of applicant or staff at this point. I see Amelia's hand right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note one item that Stephen and I had discussed last meeting in preparation for this case coming up, is the location of the site in the broader context of Assembly, and the fact that this does directly front the park space. I know that was something Stephen had planned to highlight as a staff note before before concluding presentation on this matter. So just raising that in his absence.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Anybody else right now? Okay. Let me open up my participant list. There we go. I just need to get to a place where I can visualize the attendees. Okay, so before we proceed with any further discussion, I want to open it up to testimony. So if I could have anybody that wants to speak in support of this application, please exercise the raise hand button and I'll call on you in the order in which I see you. So once, twice, seeing none, and then close that portion of the public hearing and open it up to anybody that wants to speak in opposition to the application or otherwise express concern thereto. Once, twice. No one has raised their hand, so we are going back to discussion by members of the planning board of this application. I do see Sarah Lewis, who has appeared from the darkness. And I don't know if Sarah, on behalf of staff, has anything that she would like to be able to address the board with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to let the board know that I was briefed by Steve on this project, and his intent of the no recommendation was to leave it up to the board as professionals to evaluate and determine as you see fit.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay. With that in mind, who of my colleagues would like to have any questions, comments, or discussion? First. Yes, Luke.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll ask one first question that's been on my mind throughout all this, which is, I'm just not familiar with Comparian or this type of sort of walk-in insurance agency. But as I was thinking about this, I kept thinking about all the like bank coffee shops that have sprouted up. And I know there's a Capital One bank coffee shop in Assembly Square already. How, like, I get the sense that this wouldn't be as active a use as those coffee shops really are, but maybe I'm wrong. So I'm curious for a description, and specifically, like, do you all have any benchmarks for likely walk-in traffic on a daily basis from other Comparian storefronts, if those exist already?
I'm gonna let, I think I'll let Bill sort of speak to that. Member Schuster, if that's okay. And we can, I'm assuming the board will get into a little more detail about the location, the external factors of this location, and I may add my 2 cents to that too. But Bill, do you want to give a sense of how, I think what Member Schuster's asking is, do we have reference for other offices in terms of, you know, what the city can expect for active use there?
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. Thank you, board, for this opportunity. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about our office. We don't have specific numbers, but we do have some experience in other locations across the country where these live, work, play locations have worked very well for us for walk-in traffic and so forth. And to answer your question, Luke, about the type of office, think of it as this is a unique office where the Liberty office or the Comparian office will sell over 50 different companies' products. So it is attractive to bring people. It's not just Liberty Mutual Insurance, it's various other companies' insurance, and that will be a draw. And also I'll add, I know Anthony mentioned it before, this is our flagship office, so a lot of our Comparian executives will be located here. So this will also be a draw for think of those 50 other companies and their executives. They will be coming into this area and visiting this office for hotels and restaurants and so forth.
Helpful. There's one other detail that I realized I might not have been clear on, which is just in reading the application, there's some reference, and I don't have it, I didn't find it immediately, but to like offering beverages, and that's why I thought to the Capital One coffee shop comparison, but it's not the case that there's gonna be a cafe selling beverages to the general public, right? It's more like you might get a bottle of water if you're in there looking for insurance. Is that what the reference to beverages
Yeah,
is?
that's probably a better reference, Luke. Yes.
Okay. I'm all set for the moment anyway.
All right, good. Who else? Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to start with a quick question around hours of operation. So I know we're trying to make the supportive use space something that helps make this maybe a slightly more active use. But I also see on this slide on the right-hand side that the hours of operation are only expected to be 8:30 to 5 Monday to Friday. And obviously with the development of a park, you would hope that there'd be a little bit more interaction, especially on the weekends. So just wanted to clarify that a little bit and confirm that in my head that this is right, that there would not be access to that supportive use space outside of those business hours. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. There will be, like the slide says, 8:30 to 5 normal, but there will be appointments, several after-hour appointments and so forth for that, both on the evenings, Sundays, and weekends.
And I may add, and I don't want to pick a fight over this because I think I'm amongst the biggest fans of Assembly Square, and I go way back on supporting Assembly in every way. When I was first engaged, my first question was, why not retail? And we have not gotten good feedback, and I think the vacancy of the space sort of speaks to this, that edge we don't have a lot of confidence in as retail space. It's not a massive park that's going to drive a lot of that kind of activity. So we do think there's enough retail in proximity that folks that were to utilize the park would be would have options. But I just wanted to say that it's not something that we didn't talk about. And obviously I don't want to overstep that I leave it to the board's expertise on Assembly and what your aspirations are. We think this is a great option to get the space, to get active and taxable space up and running and moving for the space. And we were happy to provide the supportive space that the city had asked us to consider.
Yeah. And if the board would let me, I'll add one more. The supportive use space, we're talking about the hours, that will be available after hours as needed. It's a separately secured space.
Okay, Amelia, did I see Michael? Are you through with your questions?
Yeah, I could hang back for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. I see Amelia.
I was just going to ask if the applicant team is comfortable sharing with us the term of the lease for this tenant.
It's a 5-year lease.
But thank you for sharing that. I'm interested in potentially discussing, if other board members feel similarly, whether there is a way to allow a version of this to move forward, but not whether there's a mechanism that can be used to allow this applicant with the right use for this supportive space to advance while still maintaining a requirement for, in the future, a more active space here. I think that I have concerns about this because this is not the sort of use that was envisioned for this space per Assembly's plan. And I absolutely appreciate the volunteering of the supportive use space, but I think that the inclusion of storage space is really antithetical to the idea that we're trying to come up with a way to revert this to the active use that it was intended to be. So I'm struggling a little bit with whether the supportive use space is sufficient as a sort of strategy to get us back into the right realm. But I also feel like the retail environment is not that strong at the moment, and it might not be that strong for the next 5 years. And the idea that when the tenancy of this space changes again, that it would again be subject to an active use gives me a little bit more comfort than writing that condition out indefinitely. So I don't know if we have a mechanism to do that, or if that would be something we can entertain. But those are some of my thoughts. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the question. My gut is, well, let me speak to the positive response to that. The storage idea was suggested at this staff meeting. I don't think probably a lot of thought went into it, Member Abov. So there may be a way to sort of look at it from the meeting space standpoint also, because I have not talked to the Mystics about this location, but I know there has been a desire for meeting space and assembly in the past. I've worked on that over on Middlesex, but it was storage / meeting. So to the extent that you're more comfortable, we're open to that being more clearly defined as opposed to storage. I just wanted to say that the investment that Liberty has to make in the space is pretty significant. So I'm not optimistic that, my guess is that Liberty's optimistic about extending that lease before the 5-year term's over, but I would let Bill speak to that.
Just to clarify, I would be proposing something where that reverted at the end of the lease, at the end of Liberty's tenancy, whenever.
Oh, good.
And I'm glad to hear that there is room for discussion still on supportive use space. I would be interested in understanding better sort of how far you think we can push the envelope, because it sounds like there's an appetite for something that's more like meeting space, but an artist studio would be too far. And I don't want to speak for my fellow board members, but I think looking at the intent of the district and the original zoning, sort of the more active, the more community serving, the more foot traffic or, intentional use, the better. So definitely interested in hearing what else we think might be a good use of that space that could be made available. Thank you.
And thank you. And I'll respond. It really, I want to be really sensitive to how hard everybody's worked on this. The memo sort of references some of the potential concerns around art use, but I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm a huge supporter of the arts, and I don't want to be critical of sort of, they get into fumes and things like that. It's really about what Liberty's comfortable overseeing, and the meeting / storage, some combination or further definition or refinement of that is what Liberty's comfortable with. So I can't really stray too far from that those two concepts. Sorry.
Amelia, do you have anything further?
Not for now. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody else have anything that they would like to add at this time? Okay. My turn. So the NFL kicks off tonight, and we're in the middle of the US Open. And I'm thinking about things that are fun to watch, things that are engaging, things that are activating. One of the things that I like to watch least are my work meetings. Things I like to watch even less than that other people's work meetings in their cubicles and in their conference rooms. You know what I'd like to watch even less than that? A garden shed full of stuff having a supportive use for a park. I don't like this idea. I don't think this meets the criteria for what we're expecting for this space for a 1 acre park in the middle of Assembly Square. I don't. I don't think it can be limited in time like Amelia suggests, particularly because this applicant intends to have a renewed lease for beyond the 5-year initial period. And what are we going to do after 5 o'clock on weekdays and all weekends when we're having a dark storefront and maybe a shed? That to me is a horrendous use of this space. Understanding that this is a valuable use that could be better located elsewhere in Assembly Square or elsewhere in the neighborhood, not for across the street from a park. This is not at all what I envisioned when we passed the Assembly Square zoning and amended it multiple times. So it's my opinion that the staff has given some helpful suggestions on ways that might be able to move the planning board forward on maybe a positive vote. It does not seem from the presentation that's been given this evening that that's something that you're willing to go towards for a number of reasons that I think are perfectly valid for sure. This isn't what this site was designed to be. This is going to be a dark storefront for the majority of time that the open space across from it is going to be used. And that's not how we intended Assembly Square, and that's not the way that we intended this particular site. So what I really hope that the applicant will do, because I want, as Attorney Galuccio knows, I want to get to a place where we can be supportive of the application. I, as one member, am not at this point. I would truly encourage you to listen to staff, to see what we can do with this space to get to a point where the planning board might be supportive. Because right now, I'm not there in the least. It seems like a number of my colleagues are not. And I don't want to put you in a hole for a couple of years on this application. I want to get to a place where we might be able to be supportive, and I don't think we're there yet. So I would encourage you to go back to staff, see what it is that might be able to be worked out. If we can get there, I really do hope so. And if not, I don't think we're there. I don't think this board is where we need to be able to give you a positive vote on this application. And Attorney Galuccio, I don't like to vote no if I don't have to. I like to try to reach consensus where we can. And I don't think that consensus is here yet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in the book that no one will read about my life as a permitting attorney, this is the moment that they call the crossroads. And what I would say is, and member Aboff's suggestion, no issue. That's an internal decision to have this flashback or sunset once the tenancy ends. Totally fine with that, and we're fine with as much meeting or as much storage or any sort of version of that as possible as a condition. But beyond that, Mr. Chair, Liberty does not believe more conversations with staff will be helpful. And again, I'm a huge fan of the planning staff, and I understand that, the idea that was raised, maybe folks had second thoughts, maybe some staff hadn't weighed in, but we started shy of May, and Liberty has to move forward with a flagship headquarters for this piece in this region. So we would prefer a vote tonight one way or the other. And I totally appreciate your suggestion. And if I think you know me, I've done all I can to move the ship. And I think, staff has tried and different staff members have, but I don't think additional conversations with staff are going to get us closer to the ideas that have been raised. The ones that have been raised that we can agree to, we have agreed to. And again, there's probably a little flexibility in that, but not in terms of those other suggested uses. And I say all that respectfully and appreciate the position you're in.
Of course. Anthony, do you need a few minutes with your client? Are you ready for us to go on this?
I don't.
Okay. Does anybody
Thank you.
else on the planning board have anything that they would like to add for the good of this meeting and this presentation? Yes, no.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to say, I'm not sure what you are envisioning as what would be appropriate here, nor am I sure how far Mr. Guccio may be able to bring his client, but like, I can still imagine a number of uses that are less disruptive than an artist studio that might be acceptable here. And I agree with everything that you previously said, Michael, about the intention of this space. But like a gallery where we were displaying work by local artists would not generate fumes and might be something to be entertained. A service outlet for the library, like I can imagine there are things that are not physically disruptive in the way that Attorney Guccio has communicated. There's a concern from Liberty that could be valid uses here that are more aligned with the spirit of the staff memo. So this is really just a final plea to see if we can brainstorm more as a board or with staff to get to something that might work. Before I understand we're going to likely move on to taking a vote. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you. The idea of having art in the window of the sportive space, that was out there. It's something that we can certainly revisit to the extent that it becomes all gallery space. I'm not sure how unaligned that is with meeting space. I mean, if you had meeting space and that people were displaying art, you're sort of in the same, I think you're sort of in the same category. We do understand that, we'll end up in a license agreement with the city, and the city's going to want to have access to this space outside the hours that Liberty's in the space. So we're comfortable with it being active beyond those hours. So it's a good suggestion. Where we draw a hard line is, the active artist use in the studio is it just won't work. But thank you for your effort in raising that.
I think we are where we are. And so we have been asked to take a vote this evening, to the extent that we can, and I think we ought to, out of respect for the applicant. So following public testimony, review of the submitted materials, and deliberation of the required considerations, and findings outlined by the zoning ordinance, I move to deny the major amendment to the previously issued special permit with site plan review, Planning Board 2018-12 in the Assembly Square Mixed Use District, seconded by Amelia. Sarah, can I please have a roll call vote?
Absolutely. Roll call vote. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Hi.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Luke Schuster,
Hi.
and Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Thank you for the applicant, and good luck in future applications.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and honorable members. Good evening.
Have a nice night.
Thank you. You too.
Those are all of the hearings that the planning board has this evening. we will be taking up other business, but what I'd like to do is take a very, very brief 5-minute recess and reconvene at 7:25. So the planning board is in recess until 7:25. Be aware that the video is still on, the audio is still on for anybody that wants to come back early.
Do we need to take a vote on recess, or is that's at the chair's pleasure? Okay.
Okay, so at 7:26 PM, the planning board is back in session. And the items before the board are matters of other business for which two items for which we have already taken testimony. Both oral and the written testimony has closed. And so it is up for discussion by members of the board, and that agenda item are two proposed zoning amendments for the Summer Nova site, the cytosites. And then the other one is the discussion of continued discussion of the brick bottom plan. And then we have another agenda item, if we have time, we want to take it up tonight, on potential amendments to standard conditions. So let me do this. Let's take up Summer Nova amendments first. This is something, again, for which the planning board and land use committee have held a joint hearing. We have taken testimony, copious oral testimony, as well as received copious written testimony. So there's as much that is before us tonight as I think we're going to get. I don't know if the proponent of these proposed zoning amendments have a representative who is in the audience who wants to be unmuted so the planning board can have a discussion between them. I see Adam Dash's hand. So if Adam can be unmuted.
Mr. Chair, Adam has been promoted to a panelist, so he should be able to join us shortly.
Okay.
Good to see you again, Mr. Chair. Could you
Welcome back, Attorney Dash.
Yeah, never went anywhere. Could we please promote Russ Preston and Kristen Phelan from the team as well, because they can answer more technical questions from the.
Sure. Just a clarification. I think you know, Adam. This is not a further presentation by the proponent. This is just to facilitate communication, discussion, and questions.
Absolutely, and I don't have a presentation prepared. I'm just saying that Kristen and Russ, if they're technical questions, we probably need them.
Okay. Great. So as a further matter of disclosure, I was absent from one discussion of this particular application. I was able to review the audio and visual record of that meeting. I filed an affidavit with the clerk. So I am ready to be able to continue discussing this item and be able to vote on a potential recommendation of the land use committee this evening. So, does anybody want to start discussion on Summer Nova? So I've certainly got some thoughts. Fewer questions, but you know, more thoughts. But I'd like to hear where my colleagues are at. And as a reminder, both for the board and for members of the public, the planning board is not the final arbiter of these proposed zoning amendments. That is the land use committee and the city council. The planning board acts as an advisory board, making a recommendation to the board of aldermen, and they can either take the recommendation, modify the recommendation, or reject it full cloth. So we have a somewhat limited role in this process, but we do have a role. So you're leaving it to me to go. Okay. All right, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with a softball one to get things rolling. So we received a letter dated August 20th from the Historic Preservation Commission, specifically discussing the American Tube Works building. I was wondering if the applicant could speak a little bit to that letter, basically confirming that they're aware of it. And then second, if they have any comments on their intentions around that building.
Sure, this is Adam Dash. Again, Sarah, if you could promote Russell Preston, he's there in the audience. Yeah, I mean, I was at that historic meeting. Yeah, that particular building, they only were discussing for our buildings that Rafi controls, just the one on Tyler Street, I believe, and that was one we were going to keep anyway. So that wasn't an issue.
Told you it was a softball. Thank you.
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Who else? Yes, Amelia.
I have a question, I think, for staff at this point. Sarah, I wonder if you might be able to speak to where the city's initiative on sort of the Fab 2.0 zoning stands, because I feel like that's relevant to this conversation.
Through the chair, a lot of there's a lot of pieces that are in motion at the moment. The Fab 2.0, as it relates to the artist specifically, then has repercussions that we are not happy with what happens to Greentown Labs. So we're trying to balance that out. So when it was originally the Fab district and the Fab uses, the ACE uses were originally thought of, the idea of complete flexibility was where it came from. So trying to unpack that is still in progress. And with this, it obviously does all tie in to this proposal. So we are still working back and forth on a lot of those different elements, but I do not have a schedule on that right now to share.
Thank you. And then I guess I'll ask another question of staff on this. If the city were to, sorry. My personal position on this at the start of this conversation is that there are many elements of this proposal that are good. There are some elements that are less good, but that fundamentally it is not the role of private developers to amalgamate sites and propose a complete rezoning in this way in this district. And I, for one, would be interested in a process that adopted many facets of this proposal, but was fundamentally a city-led process. And I'm curious if staff can speak at all to whether that's something that has been entertained, and what that hypothetical might look like if that were a viable path forward. I know that's a big question. Sorry, Sarah.
Through the chair, yes, we have discussed it. The difficulty that we had when this proposal when we first started looking at this area, we were having staffing issues in planning, and so this would have been about 2 years ago. And so we did not have the capacity to push it forward as a city-led effort at that time. Ideally, I completely concur with you, and I think all of us certainly in PPZ, and I'm going to speak for OSPCD wide, completely agree. But the idea of the timing of what the development team wanted to move forward on was not something that we, the city, could accommodate that quickly. Especially when, sort of it's a large district that would need significant community input.
Do you have any thoughts on what the timeline would be given the current levels of staffing in OSPCD if we were to move forward with the city process building upon some of this work in the near term?
Excuse me. There's sort of different ways to approach it. And that could be, obviously doing a full neighborhood plan is an extended time period. And that is probably at least a 1.5 to 2-year process, given what we've been going through on the Broadway corridor. There are also options for a more limited approach with public engagement, in as much as we do have the urban design framework tool to use in smaller areas, or where there is, sort of more detail needed than an entire neighborhood plan. Unfortunately, given the difficulty that we're in at the moment, quite bluntly, is with all the eyes on this area, doing something that is a limited scope is probably a little bit nerve-wracking to the administration. So we'd want to do this correctly. Now, there are some tools that are potential with looking at what the what SummerVision currently has the area mapped for, which is partly enhance along Somerville Avenue, and then conserve and the rear parcels. So there's some options of revisiting SummerVision, because that is the comprehensive plan that is, I don't need to tell the planning board this thing, sort of fundamentally guides all. But that would have to be a, sort of a pub that was written by a committee of 63 citizens. That would, wouldn't have to be that large, but, sort of, we'd want to make sure that was a public process as well. But that could be considered as one of the tools or approaches, along with potentially, sort of changing the underlying zoning to something perhaps less complex than the current proposal is. But there's so much that sort of needs to be unpacked. It's difficult to, sort of, I wish I had a planning wand.
Thank you for talking us through the complexity. I appreciate it.
What do we need to do to get you a planning wand?
Sorry, Chair, now I'm coughing.
All right. Thank you for your question, Amelia, because I share a lot of the thoughts and concerns that you have about the way that this has reached the planning board and land use committee. Does anybody else have any comments or questions before I kind of? Yeah, Michael.
So this is going to sound slightly off topic, but I think it does kind of dovetail into that idea a little bit. Can staff just remind me what next steps in the approval process would look like? Say, for example, the land use committee voted to approve this. What would be the next steps in an application? And importantly, how much community engagement do you think you would see through that process?
Through the chair, yeah, the next step, if this is approved, would be the master plan special permit. Now, a lot of what is outlined in the proposal is what you would see, in the master plan special permit anyway. The level of detail there goes beyond a zoning amendment usually would go to. So that does have public process review, one neighborhood meeting, but it does go through, it will come to the planning board for approval. Following that, each individual site plan, building or street or civic space would each have their own site plan approval process. And so those then each would have 2 neighborhood meetings and urban design commission before a complete application is. So there's multiple steps along the way.
Sarah, if I can ask you to just expand on that for a moment. The master plan special permit process is where there is any kind of sort of discretionary conversation. My understanding is that the limits of this board around approvals for site plans, the site plan steps of that are much more limited. Is that correct?
That is correct. The master plan is a special permit, and that's where the discretionary questions come in. In a site plan approval, only mitigations can be conditioned given a specific requirement or issue with that particular project.
Thank you.
Who else? All right, I'll go for a brief minute. So this particular set of proposed zoning amendments was interesting. I think the members of the board have expressed, and I share, that there's a lot of good potential here with expanding the use of the site and building up and making the area a little bit more useful for forward progress in what you're trying to do. The public testimony was somewhat split on this for sure. And I'm certainly not opposed to the concept of finding a way to build this up in a thoughtful manner. Usually I'm skeptical of zoning amendments that are proposed, by the landowner. After we've gone through a comprehensive zoning overhaul and thoughtful community processes about what gets zoned where. The planning board has not been opposed to changing certain zones and the way things are allowed to be built up. But in my recollection, we haven't seen something that was proponent-led to the scope and scale of this is. Usually when we see something like this is a much more collaborative process by the proponent in collaboration with the administration, usually with the neighborhood, usually with the ward counselor and the councilors at large who are involved in the area, in making it more than, as we just mentioned before, master plan, special permit, an overlay district, any number of other ways to have more thoughtful and comprehensive insight as to how this is developed. So I'm not convinced that this particular, because what's before the planning board right now is a recommendation as proposed by the applicant here. And so the recommendation that I would like to make to the land use committee, as one member, is we are generally supportive of the idea, or I am generally supportive of the idea of re-envisioning and reimagining what this area could be and what it could look like and how it can function. That would facilitate the expansion of incubator spaces, protecting art spaces, protecting historic buildings, adding housing, working with the neighborhood to make sure that it works cohesively with the neighborhood in something that is, I think, a more thoughtful and long-ranging plan, because this is substantial. And I appreciate the initiative in getting this done, but as a member of the planning board, this is, kind of as Sarah laid out, this isn't how we do things. So I'm not comfortable making a recommendation to support what's before the planning board to the land use committee. I am in support of making a broader recommendation as to encouraging the applicant or the proponent, rather, of these zoning amendments to work more collaboratively with the city and with the community and its elected officials in having something that is more comprehensive and long range, planning processes like we've seen before for um, neighborhood changing developments like this. So that's kind of where I am. I do appreciate it. I'm certainly not opposed to the concept of doing something on this side. I think it's a good idea. I don't know if this is the right avenue by which I feel comfortable moving forward. I think there are other better, more thoughtful, more comprehensive, more inclusive ways of doing this. So that would be my recommendation. I don't know if my colleagues share where my head's at, but that's kind of where I am. Yeah, look.
I'm trying to parse some of the various recountings of the history that got us here. And Sarah, I know you're in a tough spot, you know, because it's going to be tough for you to speak for all of planning staff and the broader administration also. But did I interpret correctly that through the back and forth you had with Amelia a few minutes ago, did I hear you correctly that in broad strokes, the planning department feels okay with how this process went, given the staffing constraints that you had when this began, and that characterizing it as a non-inclusive process might miss the fact that there were some unique circumstances that led here. Am I tracking that right, or did I not quite catch your perspective on that correctly?
Through the chair, not quite. So we have been working with the team for, like I said, about 2 years, and going back and forth. And I might have the timeline incorrect on that, to be honest with you. But the trying to figure out a way that we do, sort of, as Chair Capuano was saying, of course we want to see things happen here. And there's so much in this proposal that, as as you've all seen, is very, very positive. It's more about the how-to of the process that has been tricky. And so and that's where I brought up the staffing issue from the beginning, that we couldn't start a neighborhood plan at that point in time. Now, while it might not be something that we do normally see, a property owner, and in this case, there are mechanisms in place, and so the team has gone through the process by which to try to move this forward, and they are allowed to ask. In my ideal world, would this have been a planning process that we, the city, had led starting 2 years ago? Or I'm using 2 years as a general number now. Absolutely. Did that clarify?
Yeah, partially, maybe not fully, but it's gonna be hard to fully, paint a picture of not just your perspective, but planning department's perspective. So I'll just yield the floor in a moment, at least for the moment, with saying, I'm just hesitant. It may be a little bit of back and forth on particularly what the language of our no recommendation ends up being will be helpful for me, because I found the public hearing with the land use committee very helpful. And while there certainly was a diversity of perspectives from the public, some real concerns, my sense was largely overwhelmingly positive. And then my own personal perspective is I really appreciated the round of revisions in the second round that came to us, and think in broad strokes, the vision that is presented is a really positive, exciting one for this area. So if there's some way we can get to a place where it's, largely expressing appreciation for this direction, but also saying we prefer a more inclusive process or something, that might get me on board.
Look, I'll just tell you, that's largely where I am. I'm going to make a motion, whether it passes or not. I'm going to make a motion for a no recommendation, but with guidance to the land use committee that the planning board tends to be, or at least as one member, and I'll make the motion on behalf of the board, supportive of the idea of moving forward with this site in a way that's aligned with generally where they want to go, but with a more inclusive and more formalized process as we as a city have done some of these more massive neighborhood changing type of projects. Generally supportive of the idea of building out incubator spaces, and housing, public access, and all the other good things that are part of the applicant's proposal, but in a way that is more inclusive and more in line with how these things have been done. So I think I share where you're at. So that would be honestly the recommendation that I would be comfortable making. I think that probably falls along with where you said you were. Yep, I see Amelia, and then I see Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to respond to your comments and to Luke's a little bit here. What I think of the merits of this proposal, I personally will leave aside in this moment of the conversation, just talk about process, and to talk about process from the perspective of a developer. This is just not what is done, and this has been an interesting approach through and through, but this looks very official to everyone who's reading it because they've proposed language as a text amendment to the ordinance. But we had an amendment to the Union Square plan sometime in the last 2 years, where someone had also said, well, we want to do this thing that doesn't fit into any of your existing use types, so we've written in a new building type. And we all agree that that's just not what is done. You don't get to write yourself a new section of zoning because you can't make do with any of the existing options. I think the team that's been working on this, and I know Russ's team, I think that they're thoughtful planners and they've been doing good work and engaging with the community, but all the same, this process of a developer accumulating a lot of land and then coming in to totally write its own ticket is, I think, I know we talk about we're not bound by precedent, but I think it's a questionable precedent to set because it's just simply not the way that a city the size and density of Somerville that has the complexity of development going on, and even when we have someone understaffed, the professional staff and the capacity to be thinking through these things, it's not like we're, a small town where there's a part-time planner who, if a developer doesn't write their own zoning, it's not going to happen. It might happen more slowly, but there is a process for all of these things. And this plan is in front of us because we have an obligation, the mechanism of bringing map changes and text changes to the land use committee is that any group of 10 registered voters can put them forward and we have an obligation to hear them. We're not hearing this plan because the city supports it. We're not hearing this plan because it's been put forward in any more formal way in the style of a neighborhood plan. It's just as valid and as vetted in a lot of ways as the application we heard a few weeks ago for the upzoning of that one little parcel, around the corner near Union Square. So I don't want us to conflate the fact that this is before us tonight with an inappropriate degree of significance of where this proposal is and the seriousness with which we have to take it. And I say all of that thinking there are a lot of merits to this plan, but this is just not the way that this process is done. And one of the reasons that it's my stance that this should not be done this way is because all of these changes are changes that run with the land and with the buildings. They're not changes that are specific to Ruffey properties. And there was a ton of community feedback and engagement and a ton of positive community response. And I give you guys a lot of credit for that. But it was in response to Ruffey and to the work you guys have been doing and to the great community benefits you've been providing and to a lot of soft promises that are not about the built environment, about how this would feel, how the programming would be, how it would operate. And none of that is codified in a map change or a text amendment like this. So I'm just asking my fellow board members to look at this and say, yes, we might all agree that if Rafi were going to execute on this plan, that it would be something good that we would like, but there's no guarantee and there's no way to guarantee. We've been through this before, unless Sarah's come up with something else with a planning wand since we had this conversation 18 months ago. There's no way to lock into the actual text of the amendments that are being processed, obligations for those soft things, or any kind of constraint that ties to a specific developer and those soft commitments. So I feel very strongly that this needs to be a city-led process for a zoning change of this magnitude, in large part because there's nothing to say Rafi's going to be the developer to execute on this. And I want to make sure that Sarah and her team have planned the version of this neighborhood that works for the city, because Rafi could go bankrupt on, next week, and who knows who the new owner of this would be and what they would do with these entitlements that we're talking about. And I think that's an extreme circumstance, but I also think it's our responsibility to think through the fact that this mechanism creates that risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Amelia, you said what I was saying in a much more thoughtful and coherent way, I think. I do see Adam. Adam, did you want to address something? And before I recognize you, I just want to make sure there's no one else on the board that has comments or questions first. Michael, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just Adam, so you'll be able to address everything.
Yeah, I think with regards to your comment about Vice Chair Aboff, I think that's just classic Vice Chair Aboff. She always has a very coherent message, which I definitely appreciate. I think I generally agree with the sentiment that a redesign of this scale should be kind of run through a more formal process. I do, however, want to acknowledge the amount of time and resources that have been provided by the applicant on behalf of the city, right? So there has been a ton of engagement, and I definitely want to kind of, consider that with our recommendation to the land use committee. So I think I'm on board with generally where the rest of my colleagues are kind of leaning in terms of the structure of our response. I might ask my colleagues if they would consider trying to nudge some type of timeline on that process. I think I would be disappointed if it took another 2 or 3 years to go through a public city-led process. So if there's any way for us to, encourage maybe a 12-month clock or something like that, I think that would allow us to leverage a lot of the community feedback that we've received to date. And I don't know if that means that there's kind of like a modified process or not, but I just think that is something that our community can benefit from, that outreach that we've already had from the developer. So anyways, just want to kind of put that out to the group.
Yeah, Amelia.
Thank you. I think that's a great point, and I'm going to just ask another question to Sarah with apologies. I know that many years ago there was a mechanism by which the city sometimes brought on consultant planners to support the city in accelerating planning processes. Is that something that was ever entertained for this?
To the best of my knowledge, not for this area. Normally that is it is a sort of run as a consultant team on behalf of the city, similar to the Assembly Square process for that neighborhood plan. But no, I think that was whether that was resources as well as capacity. To be honest with you, I do not recall any conversations around that.
If there were resources available, would that be a mechanism that might, thinking about the sort of 12-month timeline that Michael's throwing out there for discussion, would that allow the city to potentially move forward on something in a faster pace?
I'm going to say potentially yes. However, I am going to caution that, sort of OSPCD has to evaluate the entire city at the same time. And so depending on where work efforts are, or other things that were on the, I'm going to call it the administration's agenda, or the public's, sort of the public's agenda, that we have been trying to work on different areas that we have not been able to get to as well. So the understanding what the balance is of the impacts this has on what we would have to give up doing elsewhere from a city perspective, that would need to be considered by others higher up than me.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Anybody else before I invite Adam to respond, because I know he had wanted to earlier. Okay. Seeing none, Attorney Dash, I didn't know if you wanted to engage in some further conversation or respond to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Adam Dash. It was more about, I guess, providing some more facts on how we got to here, because I think that would help this process discussion. I think should note that this has been going on with the city discussion since 2018 on this proposal, right? This isn't something new. There have been multiple meetings. Kristen can probably tell you exactly how many. I think she was saying something like 8,000. I don't know if that was hyperbole, but I've been to a lot of meetings. I have never had a project with this much public input, to be honest with you. That's how how this got developed over all of that time. As far as process goes, I can tell you, I had conversations with George Parakis when he was head of OSPCD, and they were proposing the new zoning. And he said, in other communities, developers propose the zoning, and it's a lot of work for the city to propose zoning changes. I would like to break that culture in Somerville and have developers do it. And I said, well, the problem is people don't want the developers to do it. And he's like, well, we should make it so that developers can do it. And there was a process in place to do that. We tried to work with the city to have the city do it. And it ultimately came to the point that Sarah was describing, that there wasn't any capacity for the city to do it. And they were fine with us doing it. And as you can see, we spent a lot of time and money coming up with a very complicated overlay. And the reason it's complicated is because we'd heard from the neighbors, they were concerned if they said you can do this many stories here and this many stories there, and Rafi went away, they could get some other development they didn't want. So we were trying to be as prescriptive as we could and as detailed as we could. So if Rafi went away, no one could build anything but what we're proposing. And that was why this is so detailed and why it almost gets to that master plan special permit level, because we're trying to address neighborhood concerns that someone will pull some bait and switch. You can't bait and switch. This is so baked in. There's nothing else you can build. The concern that we have, I guess, is that if we fight over the process and people like the merits, there won't even be a project because the developer is at the point where his money is going to go away, his investors. And then Greentown Labs will have to leave because it can't expand, and then everything just sort of is not what anybody wants. I would note that, we've been working very diligently to finish up the CBA with the Union Square Neighborhood Council. We've been working out a labor agreement with the unions. Those are all close, at least the labor one is at least close to being finalized. I don't know what more process anybody could do. I can tell you that the city has done this. For instance, when we did the Powder House School redevelopment, I represented the developer there. That's its own zoning district, you may recall. I can tell you, just between us, I wrote that zoning pretty much as the developer's attorney because the city didn't have the capacity to do it, and it got passed. This isn't something that's never been done. I would say what's going to happen is if we don't do it, it wasn't going to get done. And as you see, right, we were waiting for the Fab 2.0. We were told there's going to be a Fab 2.0. There's still no Fab 2.0. And the developer their investors can't wait forever, and it just doesn't move at the speed that business is moving. And I understand that the city isn't the same as a private sector, but I don't want to lose the big picture of a project that we've got a lot of we're moving more towards consensus through a very long, drawn-out series of many meetings. And Sarah was nodding yes. She knows it's been many meetings over 5 or 6 years to get to here. I don't think anybody's prejudiced by process because we put this forward. I think we've actually, done the city some favors by taking some of the work off of their back, and they've certainly reviewed it, and they're reviewing it still. but we kind of need to move it, or we're not going to have anything here, and then I don't know what happens down there. So that's, I guess we could do some fab project and put in a warehouse and call it a day, but that's not the highest and best use down there. And it's unusual for someone to have this much property in an area like this. So this is kind of a weird situation. And we did the overlay precisely because we didn't want to wipe out the underlying zoning. So this is done as an overlay, particularly with the properties we don't own, that those people don't lose anything. They have the zoning they have. There's an overlay on top. They can choose the overlay. They can keep the current zoning. They could do nothing at all. No one's harmed in any way. That's one of the reasons why we did this. And we had a lot of conversation with the city over a long time. Should it be an overlay? Should it be a district change? How do you want to do this? We talked about these new building types, like for the Tough Tech, which has higher floor to ceiling requirements. And I know that in the Fab 2.0, that was one of the building types that they were looking to do. So this isn't something some of this stuff we just didn't make up. We're actually working collaboratively with the city to develop this language. And it's been a collaboration all along. It's just difficult. I don't want to get bogged down in the process of it where we lose everything, because there's really, at the end of the day, if the city had put this forward word for word, would everyone be okay with it? I guess if that's the case, I hope we don't get bogged down in that point, because we could talk to Tom Galligani tomorrow and have him file the same thing with his name on it. I don't think it changes anything on the ground, if that just makes everybody feel better about the process. But what we should be looking at is the merits of this, because as far as process goes and neighborhood input goes, I've never seen a project with this much neighborhood input. That isn't the issue. Everyone's been heard and is still being heard, because we're still meeting with the neighborhood council on a regular basis to wrap up the CBA. So I just wanted to put that background there, because I don't think it was said. This isn't like a 2-year thing. This is like a 5 or 6 year thing that's been worked on. And if we didn't put this forward and file it, it just wasn't going to happen.
I appreciate that. Adam, I do appreciate that. I'm going to push back on just a few things, because I actually don't know if I might be the only member on this board who was around when we did the powder house zoning a number of years ago. The difference and distinction that I recall from that was that the administration was, the administration through planning and zoning was almost 100% behind the zoning change, right? The only difference that it had versus some of the neighbors, as you recall, was how was the garden going to be laid out? How was the cut through going to be laid out? It was more nuanced as to how the thing was going to happen. It was effectively a presentation and an endorsement by the city. And that has not been this. I'm not saying that there's not general support that we've certainly seen from the neighborhood. There is certainly opposition and concern. And I have not seen, and I don't think Sarah has represented that the city is in lockstep support with what the zoning changes. I frankly don't know if Tom Galligani will stamp his name on what you've proposed tomorrow and put it forward. That has not been represented to me by Sarah or by other members of staff. So I think there is a distinction to be made there. I do think there is a groundswell of support for something like this. Whether it is this or something comparable to this, it has yet to formally be seen. So I'm not ready to pretend that the city has put its stamp on an endorsement for what you've proposed. The idea that folks can write zoning amendments and propose them to the city, and the city will then endorse that, could be done in smaller circumstances. Greentown is not Powder House, right? Powder House was obviously 50% green space. This is not that. So I think this particular application, this particular idea of an overlay district is not terribly comparable. Again, I am in support of seeing something here and moving forward in the right direction. I don't feel comfortable with the way this process has moved forward. Amelia has expressed concern about that as well, and I think other members of the board might share that. I don't want to, make a make a negative recommendation because I don't have a negative recommendation on what you proposed. I have a generally positive recommendation. I just want this to be done in a way that is in the same way that we've done applications of plans of this scope and scale. If the city was on board with this, they would have signed off. They would have proposed it by them, by themselves. We would have had Sarah, or one of her colleagues say, yes, we 100% love what they're doing. We are fully in support, minus a few tweaks, and that hasn't been the case. So that to me is not necessarily a recommendation that I want to make with whole cloth to the land use committee. So that's where I am on that. I do again appreciate all the work that you've done in your team, and I don't want to stymie this, but at the same time, I don't feel comfortable making recommendations saying take exactly what they want to do and adopt it, because I don't think that's where we're at. So, does anybody have any other comments or questions that they would like to make before I propose a recommendation to the land use committee? Yes, Luke.
It's been an interesting discussion, and I find myself swinging pretty far in different directions after each of the pieces of input. I guess to the chair, as you think about the language you're about to craft, just as one member, I really am concerned about something that pushes for more process. And I just find myself often having this concern across cases where something doesn't go right in the early steps that is leading something to coming to us, and then we ask for more process. And it's just a theme across the city, not just even with planning decisions. It's happening with the Winter Hill School where my kids are at, where the ceiling tile fell and we're more than a year after that school was closed, and I don't have any sense that anything's even happening yet, except there's 2 different subcommittees that have not even yet been convened to consider so I don't want to, unfairly bring in a totally different city issue, but I just really have a growing concern that something isn't working here across all of our silos. So, something along the lines of what Michael shared sounded interesting to me, like, if there's some suggested timeline, like button this up within 12 months or something, because I think it really would be confusing and frustrating to members of the public to get invited to more input sessions on this same stuff. Now, I keep in mind also what Amelia had said about how it probably did feel to many people like an official city-run process when it wasn't, and that doesn't quite feel right. So how could we fix that in future iterations of something like this so there isn't that kind of confusion? I don't have an answer, but I'll stop for the moment.
I do want to just remind folks what we're making is a recommendation on a vote. We are not taking the vote. We are not the deciding body here, and the land use committee is more than free to completely disregard whatever we say. Take the recommendation, say thank you very much, planning board, ball it up and toss it into the trash. So I just want to put in context what we're doing this evening. Yeah, Amelia.
I guess I wonder if we can just take a step back and ask, like, the fundamental remit of the planning board is to opine on is to provide guidance to ensure the development of the city is aligned with our comprehensive plan. And like, that's one of my holdups here, and my concern with it not coming from the city is that, like, I don't see this as necessarily, I'm curious for staff's perspective on the extent to which this is or is not sort of fundamentally aligned with Summer Vision 2040 that was adopted not so long ago.
Through the chair. Sorry, Vice Chair, I was scribbling notes. I will say that summer vision was now adopted 5 years ago. Very often communities do revisit comprehensive plans every 5 years. So that's sort of one of the things that, sort of when I'd mentioned, that's one of the options that I think we have at our disposal, is to look at revisiting the comprehensive plan. What that might entail as far as the process goes, it's not something that's necessarily standardized. But it is something that we could do to sort of get the community's feel on for how, sort of what is the increased development capacity, comfort level, support in this area. That is one way to go about it.
Thank you. I guess I would raise for consideration whether it's worth calling out in our recommend the extent to which we feel this does or does not sort of comply with the existing adopted SAR. I mean, this is right on the edge of enhance, which is what it is categorized as, and transform. And I personally, my feeling is that there is more of a goal of this being a transformative development for this neighborhood. And that is part of my hesitation, why I feel so strongly about seeing this come from the city's perspective. And I do appreciate that this has been in the works for a long time, but then I don't understand how we wound up with the 2019 zoning overhaul that categorized this land with literally the most restrictive type of zoning in the city. So I don't know if either Attorney Dash or if Sarah, if you have any explanation on that, but I just, sorry, I'm picking apart what Michael already said in terms of it just doesn't really feel like the city is exactly in lockstep here as much as I would like to believe that is the case.
Does anybody else have anything else that they would like to add? Because we've now been talking about this quite a while. We've kind of gone back and forth on the same points of concerns of process and general support of the idea behind this. I think we're at the point now, unless that anybody has anything new that they would like to add for the good of this discussion or the meeting, that we should move forward with doing our duty and making a recommendation to the land use committee.
I guess, Mr. Chair, answer Ms. Avoff's question, because she directed it towards me, would be that yeah, when the zoning change happened, we were told that the fab that was put on there was a placeholder and that would be fixed later. Never happened. I would also note that the development, as the discussions with the neighbors and all happened, all these requests for benefits, things like community space and the community center and art space for affordable artists and lower rent for certain businesses and all that obviously drives the development to be bigger in order to afford such things. And so it's sort of like a symbiotic how we got to where we are. But thank you.
I appreciate that. And I also want to piggyback on Michael's suggestion that we do make a recommendation that something does happen with some speed. So we're not sitting here for another 5 years and losing the opportunity to have a thoughtful redevelopment of this site with the appropriate process and the appropriate support from the administration and from elected officials, and to the extent possible, as many of the neighbors we can. So what I'd like to do is just take a quick poll of my members to make sure that there are no other comments, questions, or concerns that they'd like to raise. Is I would like to vote on a recommendation to the Land Use Committee tonight, because I think this is kind of the deadline by which we have to do so. And my recommendation, as I indicated before, is going to be a no recommendation. And I would like that no recommendation to incorporate the discussion and the major points that the planning board has had on this. And that no recommendation is something that's going to be written up by the city staff and signed off on and reviewed by me to make sure that it appropriately reflects what those concerns were and suggestions by the board. Because as many as I can think of, the staff will have the benefit of the actual, audio record while they're writing up the report. I do want, as one part of it, to share Michael's concern that while we might not be, in lockstep support of this particular application, we are largely in support of it, and something similar to it that we'd like the administration to truly get behind, something that they can with, I don't want to necessarily put a clock on it, but let's use that old, amorphous, all deliberate speed. Let's get this going. Let's really do this in a way that's cohesive, comprehensive, and something that we can all stay fully behind, because I don't think we are quite there yet. With that being the motion, as loquacious as it is, I see Amelia seconds that recommendation. And I will ask Sarah to please call the roll.
Absolutely. Voting on the recommendation to the Land Use Committee, Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Hi.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
and Luke Schuster.
Hey.
We have a unanimous recommendation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for your time on this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Have a good night. We have two further items on the agenda. Sarah's still here with us. Sorry to keep you quite so long, but we do want to hear about the brick bottom plan, and we would like to hopefully move forward and taking a vote on adopting it.
Absolutely would help if I unmute myself. So I just have a few words to sort of flag things for the changes in the document that you received. One of the most significant sections is based on the comments that we'd heard from the board at the last meeting, was to go back and revisit the design guidelines section. And what we've done is actually simplify that quite a bit. So there were some instances where, sort of obviously the sustainability issues were brought forward. We did have the Office of Sustainability and Environment go through and review those as we had rewritten and refocused. We did go through and remove some of the redundant guidelines. So there were lots of things in there that were similar or duplicative of what's in a lot of the zoning ordinance anyway. So what we wanted to include in this document are just things that are specific to brick bottom, because the design guidelines still are part of the zoning districts themselves. And then the other thing we did is clarify that the design guidelines are recommendations. This is not a sort of a requirement as it is in other rules and regs. There's one thing that we did reconsider as we looked at that I wanted to point out, that having a special permit for lab uses, as we went back and looked at that and looked at the program and other goals that are in place, I don't think we sort of came to the point that that's not really necessary, just because there's so many other program requirements about the ACE uses, about artists housing, about sort of the walkability and the active uses and all those sort of things that so we're proposing removing that recommendation. And then the other piece, we added a lot of general clarifications and updates for readability. So one of the things that we're looking at internally a lot now is sort of to make sure that it's in language. Planners are notoriously lingo-centric. So we've actually gone back and looked at sort of some of the pieces like the forward and the plan types that we will have in all of our neighborhood planning documents to make sure that those are in plain language, quite bluntly. So all the tables and things like that got updated along those lines as well. But those are the big things that you would most readily notice.
Anybody like to make any comments or further questions on what Sarah's proposed or presented?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes. No.
Just thank you for your attention to the conflict with the design guidelines and the sustainability targets. I appreciate those modifications. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? I also want to thank Sarah for her thoughtful presentation on this and the work that was done on this plan. I believe it is the planning board's obligation to vote on adoption of the plan. Sarah, is that the appropriate next move that we take?
Mr. Chair, yeah, and I would like to suggest, so the motion should be to approve the Brick Bottom Neighborhood Plan as an appendix and implementation plan of Summer Vision.
With Sarah's language in place, the chair so moves. Seconded by Amelia. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, you may. On the Brick Bottom Neighborhood Plan, Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Hi.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Luke Schuster,
Aye.
and Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Okay, we have a plan.
Thank you all. I'm so excited.
Of course. We have one other item on the agenda. I don't know how much time we're going to want to spend on it tonight. I think this is just a preliminary discussion about potential specific ideas on how we might want to change some of our standing conditions. As time has gone on, we have realized that some things might not work as well as we thought they might. Things that we might want to include, make the planning board more efficient, more thoughtful, and more accountable. So I certainly had one that I was thinking of, potentially two, but I wanted to kind of poll folks to see if they had any particular thoughts on anything that they would like to discuss. I don't want to vote on anything tonight. I just want to kind of have a general discussion of where people think they might want discussions on standard conditions to be. We can take up, some at certain points tonight, future dates. I want this to be an ongoing discussion on where people think we might be able to improve our processes to make sure that we're operating in the best way that we can. So I'd like to open the floor up to Amelia first.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I just want to suggest a approach to this that we can take relief, but Stephen had shared with us a spreadsheet a folder with 5 different spreadsheets that relate to different categories of conditions. And I wonder if we might want to focus on them one at a time in upcoming meetings in order to make sure folks, having started to go through them, I think there's a lot there, and it's a lot for an open-ended question.
Yeah. I want to take those, but I also want to invite folks that as time goes on for things that aren't already on certain lists for consideration, to allow and welcome the members to think about ways that we can, amend our conditions to make us a better board. Yes, Sarah.
Mr. Chair, I just want to sort of add as a piece of you as a board these are standard conditions. These are things that have been vetted through legal, through ISD, and so those are those, you know, sort of those pieces that apply to many, many projects. Within the sort of legal parameters and enforcement, and obviously all those things, you as a board are entitled to add conditions to mitigate issues in the vicinity of a proposal at any point in time. So I just wanted to put that out there as a caution of, we don't want everything and the kitchen sink in the standard conditions, because we do have those options of customized language for specific issues. So thank you for that.
No, I appreciate that that consideration, because that is something that I share, that we do have some concerns, and some standard conditions are great, but we do, as you know, impose individual conditions on individual projects where it's appropriate. So when we are thinking about what should be a standard condition, we really should think about, is this something that is appropriate to be applicable to all applications? And it's if we agree that the planning board itself thinks that we should do this, it should be vetted by the appropriate city staff, ISD, our law department, and anyone else that needs to weigh in, so that we can make sure that we're not doing something that's going to put us in, in some hot water going forward, or impose unnecessary conditions where they might not always be applicable or preferable. So yeah, look.
Thanks. I think Sarah's comment helps answer a question I was about to ask, but I'm not certain. So can I check, which is to say, there were a couple sorts of conditions that I had thought were standard, but maybe they're not capital S standard in the same way, because I had them referenced in the course of our work, but I didn't see them anywhere in any of the spreadsheets that were sent to us. So let me give an example. And maybe it's a standard practice that we've adopted, although probably not formally adopted. But anyhow, an example, requiring new businesses within a half a mile of transit that don't have parking. I'm sure I'm getting it partially wrong already, but to provide both MBTA passes to their employees and Blue Bike memberships. Am I tracking right that I didn't see that in any of the spreadsheets, because that's not a capital S standard condition, but that's something we've chosen to do consistently? Is that describing the right way?
Through the chair, that's a very, very good question. So it's not whether the S is capitalized or not. It's basically what we look at from the planning and zoning perspective versus what might be a condition as part of the mobility management plan. And so a lot of those are those conditions, like the Blue Bikes and the MBTA passes, are often associated with mobility and the MMPs and that work. So they get incorporated sort of by reference, if you like, rather than being one of the standard conditions applicable to everything.
Just taking the Blue Bike plus MBTA pass example, not because we should debate that particular one right now, but just because it's a for instance. Was there ever a vote the planning board made to have that in consistently? No, right? It's just started to happen, and then we wanted to keep a precedent to treat all new businesses similarly. And the way we would change a decision like that is just at a future one, apply it differently. Am I tracking that correctly?
Correct. And the yes, and it would be specific to that particular site as to what those particular parameters, sort of would need to be. Now, and like I said, sort of having, and I think this is one of those things, is we have these discussions about the spreadsheets. I think it's probably worth making sure that we have, sort of mobility or PSEF or engineering also in part of those discussions if we go through them one at a time, just to make sure that, sort of, I'm a planner. I will spout expertise all day long, but is it true? Not always. So I think having the right people in the conversation could be helpful as well, to your point.
Luke, I just want to say I appreciate your attention to always trying to look at ways we can lessen the burden on small businesses. I think that's a very helpful perspective to bring, and I'm sorry that our answers are sometimes not satisfying.
It's funny, if Luke of 20 years ago knew that he was developing the reputation of being the, guy going to bat for business, and, he would get a laugh at that. But
So, yeah, so this is just the beginning of the discussion on some of these things. I don't know if I want to take anything specifically up now at this particular hour. I think I just want to bring it onto the agenda, have folks look at it, have an idea that we will be kind of moving through these in future weeks and months, and seeing where we wind up on them, what we think we might want to do, where the legal advice and other planning advice might lie as it relates to them, and move forward. So, yeah, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one item I just wanted to highlight, and this is not pertaining to any specific standard condition here, but it's something that's important for me, so I just want to highlight it for the benefit of my fellow board members, and it's around monitoring. So what I'm thinking of is just to use an example, on the thoroughfares spreadsheet, there's for parking, there's an annual report including documentation of any changes to layout plans, operations plan of the parking facility must be submitted to validate continued compliance with the Somerville zoning ordinance, the decision, and the Director of Mobility standards for monitoring and annual reporting. That's one area that I've always been curious about, and I'm not just selecting this is just an example where when it comes to monitoring, once we have given, whether it's a certain site plan approval with certain set of conditions, or whether it pertains to parking, mobility, that whole area, what is the monitoring mechanism? Just because we want to make sure that we're approaching this as a board. I believe we are approaching this as a board with the understanding expectation that we are, once we're giving a certain approval with certain standard conditions that have a monitoring feature, that the monitoring will occur, and should there be any violations or changes, or a need for the then applicant to, whether they need to deal with a city department to rectify the change, or should it be necessary for them to come back to us sometime in the future, that's maintained. So again, this is not for tonight. It's just something, as we discuss in subsequent meetings, for us to keep in mind. And I would certainly encourage the monitoring mechanism to be reviewed closely. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Amelia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Jahan's point is an important one, especially in relation to sort of where the responsibilities are divided between OSPCD and ISD. And to the extent that we can use some of this conversation as a way to help OSPCD enhance ISD's attention to some of these items, I can speak for, I think, at least a few of us in saying that we'd love to help with that.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to add for the benefit of the discussion as it stands at this point? Okay. Seeing none, I want to thank everybody for a very productive meeting. I want to thank Debbie for her service with us. Wish her luck.
Thank you.
And with nothing further on the planning board's agenda, at 8:41 PM, the chair moves to adjourn, seconded by Amelia. Sarah, can we have a roll call, please?
Roll call vote to adjourn. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aba,
Hi.
Jahan Habib, Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
And for the sadly final time, Debbie Howard Easton.
I hope to see you all around the Ville in the future.
Miss you.
Absolutely. And
Well,
just for
that's
the
Debbie.
record, my pen ran out of ink, so it's a good thing we closed the meeting.
I'm glad that's not a euphemism.
Good
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
night, all.
Aye,
Thank
take
you.
care.
All the best, Debbie. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.